Hello everyone and welcome. In the beginning, we had to teach bartenders how to be mixologists. Now we have to teach all of these mixologists how to be bartenders. This is a quote by Michael Waterhouse and the beginning of the submission we received for the session. It was eye-catching at first, but when we reached the end of the description, we were sold. And if you're wondering about committing to watching this, listen to the rest. The chemistry of cocktails is well discussed and has driven innovations for over a decade. Moving forward, we need to re-examine the idea that further innovation exists in chemistry alone. There are only so many combinations of spirits that can exist, and the quest for finding increasingly esoteric ingredients is leaving many bars, bartenders, and drinkers behind. Contextualizing the cocktail, asking not what it is, but where it is served and why it is important, holds the key to future innovation. This gives bars and the bartenders who preside over them a much more prominent role in how the drinks we make create a lasting impact on those we serve. In this discussion, we'll explore the neurology of the cocktail and how the bartender and drinker collaborate to make experiences that transcend the liquids in our glasses. A session like this, of course, needs some authority behind it. So, our presenter today, a working bartender for over 25 years, Michael Neff has run bars across the United States. Highlights include the Holiday Cocktail Lounge in New York City and the Cottonmouth Club in Houston. His bars and programs generally tread the line between notoriety and legend, but are remembered for a style of service that fosters community, bonhomie, and the idea that bars are bigger than people who make them. More recently, he has been a stalwart of social media, streaming sessions nightly and giving hope and voice to his community and industry. That being said, Michael, take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. So yeah, context. Context is, we've over the last 25 years or so, we've seen so much in the cocktail world. Like this is the beginning of what we call the big change, right? The modern cocktail movement. And it was from a time when cocktails were generally considered to be like sweet things that didn't necessarily have an importance, right? To us doing a lot of research, us being bartenders, people going through, finding old books, brands coming through and giving us all these new products, things that had existed in the past, like finding new things all over the world, like very exciting time. And because of that, because of all of that, training bartenders became a specific kind of thing, right? We had to, and like Michael Waterhouse's quote, like if you don't know Michael Waterhouse, he was one of the great early kind of bar makers in what we call the new age of the modern cocktail, right? He had a place called Dylan Prime in New York City, one of the first programs that existed in New York that used like everything had to be jiggered, right? It was very precise in a way that we didn't really do at the time. You know, he had hundreds of cocktails on his menu. It's like a very, very early proto cocktail bar, like I called him. And his quote always stuck out with me because I remember that time. You know, I was one of those bartenders that he was talking about because bartenders at the time had to be specific things, right? You had to be either good looking, you had to be funny, or you had to be fast. What you couldn't be is you couldn't be dorky, right? You couldn't be cerebral. Because there was nothing to be cerebral about. You know, people went to a bar to have fun. They didn't necessarily go to drink cocktails for their own sake. Cocktails were something they did because that's what you drank when you were there. And that's an important distinction. So what Waterhouse was talking about is he was remembering a time when you had to take bartenders who never really thought about, you know, the precision of what they were doing, and we had to drill in them that precision. This is how you do it. You know, exactly this much of that, exactly this much of this, exactly in this fashion. And it took a long time. It took a long time to get people to really understand the value of that, because bartenders were used to doing other things. Why would I waste time if my money was coming from all of these people having, you know, singing and dancing and having a great time? Why would I take extra time to focus on what was going in the glass? You know, and we did that very, very well. And I mean, BCB is a perfect testament to the success of that, right? The fact that, you know, now we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books that just focus on method. All of our training programs are based on just getting people to precisely do all these things. What we've lost, and this is what that quote, this is why it really stuck out with me, right? What we've lost is the ability in those training programs to get people to understand why it is what we're doing, why we're doing what we're doing. What is the purpose of this? You know, why take extra time? Why, like, what is the purpose of a cocktail? And this is what I want to talk about right now. You know, and this is an idea of context. We talk a lot about how to do things exhaustively, it's exactly how to do it, but we almost never anymore talk about why. So the question I have for everybody right now is, what is a cocktail? Like, what is it? What is its purpose? What is it for? You know, and you can say, you know, those are two questions. So let's start, like, what is it? So is a cocktail its recipe? Because that's an easy answer, right? You could say, well, so what is an old fashioned? An old fashioned is some kind of spirit. It's Angostura bitter, some kind of sweetener, and then probably a little water to dilute it, and then a garnish of some sort for some purpose. Is that a definition? And the question really is that even a recipe? Because, you know, I have my way of doing an old fashioned, making an old fashioned. You know, someone in London might have their way of making an old fashioned, but it's almost like a bar to bar thing. How you're initially trained to do it kind of puts a stamp on you as a mixologist and as a bartender, saying, like, this is how I learned. But, and this is a critical part, if one thing in that changes, then you have to adjust everything else that you do. Right? So what if you decide to use rye whiskey instead of bourbon whiskey? Is it still exactly the same proportions of sugar? Different kind of sugar? Does that change the proportion? What if your Angostura bottle, like, everyone who's a bartender knows that you can say 3 dashes of Angostura is the perfect old fashioned, right? What if that, excuse me, what if that bottle is brand new? Because every bartender knows if it's a brand new bottle of Ango and you put 3 little dashes, it's like dink, dink, dink. But if it's halfway through, it's like yoink, yoink. So we're not measuring out every single thing, because the old fashioned, one of the simplest drinks that you could actually make is actually very, very difficult to pull off, because you can't just do it the same way every time. And so thinking about that further, and you're thinking, okay, so let's not define the cocktail totally. Let's just define the old fashioned. What is it? So you could say it's spirit, sugar, bitter, garnish, right? So citrus of some sort. And it's like, okay, cool. If we cannot even define how much of one thing goes into that drink, then we really have to think about a different way of defining what it is and what it's for. So if I'm making an old fashioned for whomever's watching right now, you know, and I line up every single one of them, there is no way on earth that those things would be chemically identical. It's impossible. It's even really impossible if I were to make them all in one big thing, you know, and then over time, you know, over the course of how much time, like 3 minutes, 4 minutes, chemically, everything changes by the second. Even the later ones have a little bit more water in them, you know. So because we can't do those things, I've started looking at an old fashioned as a very different thing, because there's a reason why you would go and have an old fashioned at a bar. There's a reason why you would go and have an old fashioned at a famous bar, right? What's the difference between having an old fashioned at PDT in New York City as opposed to in your house? You know, what's the benefit of having it at a sports bar if you're watching a football match, as opposed to having it in the backyard if you're having people over? You know, all of those things are context. And context means really that we're attacking where flavor is processed. We're hitting people where they process flavor, and where they process flavor is in their brain. So even if people don't understand what they're doing, the act of making a cocktail of any sort in a bar is an incredibly complicated neurological experiment. everything from the decor to the music to the bartender, how that person is dressed, to the fancy tools that we use now, to how we display. Every single one of those things is kind of triggering little neurons in people's heads to get them to do two things. One is to get them excited. So if I can get you excited about drinking this drink, then all of a sudden, all of these changes happen in your body and it makes you anticipate. You start to salivate, right? And you start to get excited about, oh, it's like, oh my God, that person's here and they're going to make the drink right now. Oh my God, they're so famous. I saw them in Imbibe. And then, like your body just starts to literally just, it starts to tune itself to have a good experience. And a good bartender understands that that's happening. And that's the key. The bartender understanding that it's happening, because it's going to happen one way or the other. If we don't train people to anticipate it and utilize it, then we're leaving a big tool on the table for that bartender. Because if they're focused on saying like, oh, I want to do it exactly this way, they're not opening themselves up to the wonderful thing that happens in a cocktail, which is the second thing I wanted to talk about, which is trust, faith. Ordering a cocktail for a customer is an act of faith. It's faith of they're putting their sobriety in your hands. They're putting their money in your hands. They're putting something really important, maybe we're unique. We get to go bars all the time. We get to drink. I drink cocktails for a living because I'm a cocktail person, right? Most people aren't that. Most people get one night a week, maybe they get to go out. Some people get one night a month or even one night a year. Like imagine you're sitting there with your spouse. It's your anniversary. You're going back to the bar where you guys met. You have kids and you got a babysitter and you have all this stuff. Imagine the pressure on this person. Knowing that the course of this incredibly special night, all they have in them is 3 cocktails. That's all they get. So an entire year they've been waiting for this. They only get 3 drinks each. And so they're looking at you saying, I'm letting you make one of them. I'm letting you make one of them. I'm trusting my entire anniversary. The success of my entire marriage is really just like riding on this night. So imagine the mindset of this person right now. And they've been saving up money and they took an Uber, like they're doing all this stuff, and imagine that that's your mindset. And then you sit down in front of someone and they want to talk about method. They want to explain to you that this is a high rye bourbon instead of a wheated bourbon. And then try to really get into this idea like with you. And you're like, look, I'm just trying to get laid later, man. Like, that's really interesting and everything. But I don't really want to spend a whole lot of time on this. I'd really rather spend time on telling you a story about how this is my wife. We've been married for 5 years. And 5 years ago, we were in this bar and this is where it all happened. So it's not just the customer's mindset, it's our mindset too. And let's say the first thing they're going to have is an old fashioned. So what's the opportunity? The opportunity is that you're taking a drink that has very little to it chemically, and you're layering in every single part of their relationship, right? You're taking them, you're taking the love they have for each other, you're taking the excitement they have for them being back in the place where it all happened. You're taking their trust in you based on the fact that you're wearing like a pin that has a little like thing on it and whatever it is you're wearing, and they're looking at the spoon that you have in your hand that probably costs $30 or something, and they're just saying like, well, I don't know anything about these things, but you seem like you do, so what do you got, pal? And that's when something like context gets layered in. And that's the opportunity that we have, but also that identifies what I think is a critical piece of every cocktail that is actually excellent, transformative. Anyone these days, now you can go to many, many bars and get a proper cocktail. That was not true 20 years ago. It was not true in the world that Michael Waterhouse was laying out. To get a proper cocktail, you had to go to a place that took the time to make proper cocktails. And back in those days, that was enough. That was a selling point. And that's true in cities all over the world, right? It was different eras for those things. But a lot of places, their entire marketing plan was like, we make proper cocktails. And that was enough to bring people in. Now, because of the success of the modern cocktail movement, You can get a proper cocktail lots of places. No restaurant is going to, risk hundreds of thousands of dollars making a program without someone making proper cocktails. So it's not unique anymore. So we really have to look at what is the important thing about why people drink cocktails. Excuse me real quick. All right. We have to think about why we do that, right? And this fictional couple who's coming in, as we're talking about what is in the drink and as we're training people on how to make it, the thing that I want people to remember is that because an old fashioned, based on what we talked about early, because it doesn't really have a recipe we can define, or at least if you have a recipe that changes on circumstances, it's not a recipe anymore. It's a series of ratios. So if you're experienced enough and smart enough to be able to adjust those ratios, congratulations. But you need to know why to do it. The why of the cocktail. So if I'm looking at this couple, and if I'm making them these drinks, then all of a sudden I have the ability, just based on my experience with serving thousands and thousands and thousands of people, to say like, okay, I need to give you a show, and it's this kind of show. This is a show celebrating you. In the same way I would do it is if you came to me and said, oh, I lost my job today. I'm like, that's a very different kind of show. Or if you come to me and you're like, oh, I got my book published today. And you're like, that's a very different kind of show, right? Is that cocktail the same for every single one of those people? That's the question. And if it's not, why not? Right? So as I think about cocktails and as I train cocktails, the critical component in a cocktail that can actually change people's lives, in an old fashioned that can make a grown man cry, is the people. It's the bartender and it's the guest. So if we're talking about relationships and ratios, and if we're talking about neurology, then the critical part to train is making bartenders understand that their compassion, their curiosity, their ability to understand instantly and immediately the kind of people that they're serving on a person-to-person basis makes an enormous difference. So if I'm behind the bar and someone comes to me and says, oh, I want an old fashioned, and they get on their phone, I'm like, no. Like, this is my time. This is you and me. We are not going to do this. You can't come up and say, hey, I'm going to get an old fashioned. I'm just going to run to the restroom real quick and I'm going to come back. I'm like, no, I'll wait. Because if you're not watching me do it, right? If they're not giving me the opportunity to dive into their head and pull out all those little things and make them watch and make them wait and make them just sit there and like, what's he doing now? And it's like, he's taking it. And like it's an incredibly intimate experience. If you understand that what you're doing is pulling out all these things to actually change the flavor, then you can really kind of unlock what the real power of a cocktail is. Because people don't drink cocktails because they're thirsty. You drink cocktails because you need it, and we work in spirits, right? And that idea of needing something is really kind of dangerous. And I would just say right now that alcoholism is a disease and it's a thing. And to say that I need a drink is in a certain sense, a path that is of danger. So we're going to put that path over here, right? That's for the kind of person who's in that position, but that's not the kind of people I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of person who like all day long sits at work and says, and waits for happy hour because you're like, this day is terrible. This day's terrible. And you get towards 5 o'clock or the time you get off and you're just watching the clock go by. And then you just like, as soon as it hits, you're like, boom, jacket, like, let's go. And you go and you sit at the bar and you're like, I've been waiting for this all day. I've been waiting for this all day. And it's not that I just needed they're not pounding vodka just so they can get a little bit of booze in their system. What they're doing is they're coming and sitting in front of their favorite person, their favorite bartender who makes their favorite drink and says like, I've been waiting for this. And now it's time. And now I get it. Imagine like what's happening in here in someone's heart. Imagining what's happening here. They've been waiting for it all day. And let's say you're the bartender and you're having a crappy day. And then like, you want to screw that up for somebody? You're making a terrible day worse. But But if you understand what it is that you're actually doing, then you understand the responsibility you have in making that cocktail. And if you understand that you yourself are an ingredient in that cocktail, and as is your customer, because flavor is processed in the brain. The chemistry is important and it is part of it, but it is not the most important part. What is important is, you take the glass and you kind of massage it a little bit. You respect it, and you pull in the experience as someone is, and you literally are pulling them out of their head, and you're just wiping out all of these terrible memories they had from their day, and you're just letting them, as you're going, like, bit by bit, and you're taking. So my process is, I would take a sugar cube and I would put it in there, and I would like dose it with Angostura and just give it a tiny little pop, and then you just kind of make it into a paste. And I'm doing that, and I'm putting all my attention on it, knowing that you are watching me do it too. And every single step I take is one more layer where you're breathing more, and you're just like a little more gone, a little more gone, a little more gone. By the time that drink is ready, that person is so keyed up to have it. They're just like, just give it to me, 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 right? So in that, what on earth difference does it make if I have a high rye bourbon versus a wheated bourbon? What difference does it make if I like to use a rich simple syrup versus a raw sugar cube? What difference does it make if I have cold draft ice or if I have like hotel ice? What difference does it make if I like to use a lemon or an orange? These people don't care anymore. And it's not that it doesn't matter. And it's not even that it doesn't matter to them. It's just not why they're there. People are coming because they have a need. They have a need. A cocktail fulfills a need. Its ultimate purpose is to make people happy. It's to make people happy. And we, as bartenders, are the recipients of creating this kind of joy or pleasure or catharsis or all of these things in people's lives that define why they need these cocktails, why they need them. We're now in a pandemic. This is why we're doing this virtually, right? We're doing this because we cannot be in a room right now all together. There are tens of thousands of bartenders all over the world with an empty hole in their heart right now, and they don't know why. They don't understand the anxiety they're feeling right now. They don't understand what is missing right now. And because what we're used to and what feeds us is that we're used to standing behind the bar and giving hundreds and hundreds of doses, tiny little doses of happiness to people every night. And the nature of that is that we get a little bit back too. What I am missing right now, and have been since last March, is I am missing making drinks for my clientele. Because for the last 25 years, I have spent just about every night getting my part of that back. And it's not the money, it's not the tips, it's not the pay, it's not anything else besides people saying like, oh my God, thank you. Oh my God, I needed this so much. This is so good. This is so good. And this is not an intellectual exercise. This is not something on my cocktail menu that I thought about, like what's a new method or what's some interesting thing I could do. I love that. I do it all the time. That's fun. And, that's a way to keep people interested and press interested. And, that's like fan service. That's like for us, right? The actual act of making these things is the most important part. You can have that in that other thing too. But so, I've said this a few times, and to some people it sounds like this weird kind of hippy dippy thing where they're just like, whatever Neff is like spouting his philosophy again. But, if you ask a bartender, especially someone who's gone through like a prominent training program, let's say you're super lucky and you got to work with Julie Reiner, or you got to work with Julian Cox, or you got to work with, Mr. Lyon or whatever. You come out of that with all this knowledge and pride, and you improved and you're good at your job and you have, all of these things. The first question I always have is how can you take an old fashioned and make someone cry? Is it even possible? Is there a value for it? Is it a goal? How do you make someone cry? How can you change someone's life with a cocktail? Is it possible? Is that what we do? And my contention is 100%. It's exactly what we do. And that's the only, and that should be the goal of anyone who makes drinks. You know, training programs in general are to try to get people making proper drinks. So giving them proper method. Great. But that's the easy part. It's easy for me. You said, or I mean, if you've never been a bartender before, I can spend probably 4 or 5 hours with you and give you a strong foundation in how to make proper cocktails. Congratulations. You know how to squeeze citrus, you know how to turn sugar into syrups, and you know how to like kind of like, use a little tiny cup to proportion everything out correctly. You know how to do this thing, you know how to do this thing. Great. Does that make you a bartender? No. Does it even make you into a mixologist? Because a mixologist is one who makes cocktails. It is a word, and it is a word that has meaning. No. Because if that were the case, people now have been sitting home drinking all by themselves, making cocktails that they learn from videos just like this one, and they're still not as good. And the question is why? Why is it not as good? Right? Because it's missing the emotional component. It's missing the neurological component. So unless you try to hack your own brain into having that experience, I make cocktails for myself all the time because there's nothing I want more right now. There's nothing I want more than to go into all these cities that I've been in and finding somewhere that I can have a Negroni. All I want to do is sit at a bar and say, please, just make me a Negroni. Anyone make me a Negroni right now. But because I can't do that, I have to play my own games in my own head to get myself into that scenario. And it works, kind of. It's just not as good. So how can I make myself have that experience? How can I make myself cry? I could make myself cry thinking about it right now, actually. But, and to illustrate that, I'll tell a little story. So in this pandemic, especially with what's going on in the United States, even though I know it's true also around the world, is, I miss Gary Regan. Gary Regan was the godfather of us all. He was a long-time bartender in New York City. He wrote the Joy of Mixology. He was kind of like the godfather to all of us who make cocktails. And his voice right now would be very important. And I was thinking about Gaz the other day because he died recently. And the day he died, or at least the day I found out he died, it was a Sunday, and I was in Houston, Texas. And I was, Gary, uh-oh. Sorry, good. Gary was a friend, and he was, I wish he was an actual mentor of mine, but I learned a lot from him, so I consider him a mentor. And the day he died, I was bummed, obviously, because I had lost a friend, but also the world had lost an amazing voice in the purpose of cocktails. Gary Regan would understand exactly what I'm talking right now. And the only thing that he would criticize is my ability to communicate it, because he was so much better than I am. But I was walking down the street in Houston, in downtown Houston, and it was a Sunday afternoon, and I heard music, and I heard voices, I heard people, and it was a bar, and I'm like, okay, and I just gravitated toward this bar. It was this little sports bar. It was full of people. And of course, on the day Gary Regan dies, I'm going to go into this bar, and I sit down at the bar, and back when you could do those things, and I ordered a pint of Guinness. And the woman behind the bar was excellent. And if you don't know how to pour a Guinness, there's a ritual to it. There's a method. No one has really been able to explain why that is important, because you could literally just put the pint there and just knock the thing down, fill it all the way up, and eventually it's going to do what it's going to do anyway. So it doesn't, people have tried to explain why it tastes better. I think it tastes better just because we do it. I would never serve a Guinness. I know exactly how I would do it, even though I haven't served a Guinness on tap in, 10 years. But, she did it right. And she put it down in front of me. And as she was making it, she put it down. I got really emotional. And I started to tear up a little bit, because I was thinking about my friend, and I was in this busy bar full of people all concerned about watching baseball or something. They didn't care I was there. She didn't especially care I was there either, but she had done it properly. And she sit it down in front of me, and she looked at me, and I was like, the world lost a really good bartender today. And she looked at me and she said, Gary Regan died, right? And I was like, I almost lost it. I almost lost it. But I will never forget that moment. And I will guarantee you that's the best pint of Guinness I've ever had in my entire life. And that's true, because flavor is processed here. You know, she took the time to understand that I was somewhere, didn't matter where, but it turned out she'd been a bartender for a long time. And when you're a bartender for a long time, you don't learn drinks as much as you learn people. I've made hundreds of thousands of cocktails in my career, and that makes a difference. You know, it just does. No one knows why, no one knows how. It just does. But my real ability and my real power as a bartender is that I've served millions of people, millions of them. And so the ability to just kind of like understand very quickly that someone needs something, and not even really being able to identify what it is, but the ability to kind of put out a marker and then react to what you're getting, and then take the next step in the direction it needs to go. And as you get to know someone, and it happens very quickly, you can start to tune your experience to make sure that they have what they need. If you can do that, then you can change someone's life with a cocktail. If you can do that, then you can make someone cry with an old fashioned. You know, if you can do that, then you have the ability to make people remember you in a way that they will never forget in their whole lives. I used to work in Times Square, the busiest tourist neighborhood probably on the planet. And I would have people come back 3 years after I served them and come back and be like, we're here, we're back. And I'm like,
Michael, I lost you.
I know, I see you frozen right here. I can hear you though.
Okay, we're back.
Okay.
The last thing I heard is it's been 3 years. Yeah.
There we are. There you are. Okay, I see you again. So the last thing is it's been 3 years, and they say they're back.
Yeah.
Right. They say they're back as if they're present in my head as I'm present in theirs. You know, the fact is I've served thousands of people in the intervening time, and they're just still sitting there going like, I just want to go back to New York so I can go back and see Michael again, or, you know, Gary again, or Tina again, or whomever, because, you know, to them, it's perfectly natural that I would remember them because we had such a moment. You know, we've had people like, you know, someone would show up from Cape Town, South Africa and say, oh, you know, your friend Tina sent us over from Cape Town. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. But I mean, but that's also like, imagine what goes on in people's heads, and imagine how long those people, even those people who've never met you, and this is the power of press and all these other things, you know, it's all creating that kind of excitement. You have a personal friend who said, go see my other personal friend who made me the best drink I ever had in my life. And then just like, I want that. I want the best drink I've ever had in my life. I want the best thing. Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't mean anything except to the two people involved in that relationship, which in the course of making a cocktail is you and me. That's it. That's it. It is generally agreed amongst the upper echelons of everyone in the cocktail world that it is far better, and I would much rather sit at a bar with a wonderful bartender and drink a mediocre cocktail than sit and have the most perfectly executed cocktail with a mediocre bartender. I would take the better bartender every single time. And I will go back to that place every single time I had the opportunity to, if I have that opportunity. If that is the case, and it generally is considered to be, then we need to start looking again at how we train about what a cocktail is for. What is its purpose? And if its purpose is to, you know, is to solidify and to create a relationship, then we're talking about making a bar. Because a bar, at its heart, is a community. Even if that community is a short-time community, even if it's for a couple of hours, even if it's for the course of, the Olympics, even if it's for the course of your vacation in Amsterdam, even if it's just for the course of your layover in an airport. Either way, it's still a community. And so, increasingly, I think the two most important qualities in a bartender are curiosity and compassion. Compassion, because if you don't have that, then you can't really understand that you need to adjust how you are doing what you're doing in making a cocktail to the person you're making it for. And curiosity, because you need to be able to have enough of an open mind as hundreds of people are coming to you. You need to instantly be able to make up stories about these people. What did you eat for breakfast today? Why did you choose those earrings today? All of these things, and instantly come up with an idea of what you're going to do for a stranger, and then instantly be able to change it as you get more information. So we don't talk about it and we don't train it and we don't do that because it's hard. It's easy for me to give you my cocktail book of recipes and say, memorize that. And then I'm going to test you on every single one of these drinks, and we're going to taste it. And then I'm going to sit there and I'm going to tear it apart. A little too much sour in that one, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. At the end of the day, everyone knows there is no such thing as being identical from one second to the next. There's no possible way that I can make the exact same cocktail that you can make, even if we're standing right next to each other and using the exact same ingredients, the exact same size jigger, the exact same method, the exact same training. There's just no way it happened. Because a fun game to play is like, so, I'm a old mixology guy. I've been in, right. Okay. I'm an old mixology guy. I have, I've been in the New York Times. Like I've been in magazines and stuff. So, people are like, oh, there's the famous bartender guy. I'm like, cool. And then I have someone who's like a trainee who worked in a Starbucks until yesterday. And, they're still like their first night behind the bar. And I just trained them how to make these drinks. Like just me standing there next to another person already means to people that it's like, okay, I want to go over there. They know it. And they're not wrong. I could have this brand new ex-barista put everything together in the cocktail, hand it to me, and I give it to you, and you would still have the same experience of saying, like, this is amazing. I could put together the entire thing, hand it to that person, and say, and have them serve it, and then people will be like, I still want Michael to make it. It doesn't matter that I did every step of the process, right? So as we're going forward, and this is what I want kind of people to take away. Like what I hope is, as we're thinking about training, especially as we're separate, right? Especially as because we are going to go back to our bars one day. And I want people to take this opportunity to understand what the feeling that they've had as we've been separate, and understand that we fill that hole through making cocktails as well. And our clientele has the exact same moment. So when I talk about context, especially in terms of training and in cocktails, what I want people to remember is that as you're thinking about the ingredients of the cocktails that understand that you are critical to that process. So you, in essence, are an ingredient, as is your clientele. This is why we can't be replaced by machines. Machines would do it better, more precisely, more accurately every single time. But we will always be needed, and bars will always be needed too. So a cocktail is a very powerful tool, but it's a tool in creating a relationship and creating context. And that's what I hope people remember.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much, Micah. I loved it. It was so inspirational. And yeah, I'm not a bartender and I loved it. And I think you're so right. Thank you so much.